adopted by the House on February 16, 2021, the Special Committee is meeting to discuss the economic relationship between Canada and the United States. Today, we're continuing our examination of Buy America procurement policies. I would like to welcome our witnesses, both who are returning for a second time. From the Canadian American Business Council, we have Mary Scott Greenwood, Chief Executive Officer, and from the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, we have Mr. Mark Agnew, Vice President, Policy and International. Ms. Greenwood, please go right ahead for 5 minutes, please, for your opening comments.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. It's good to be back with you again today. The policy known as Buy American has been a large and remarkably deep-rooted fact on the economic ground of our continent for generations. The Canadian American Business Council has grappled with it repeatedly since our founding more than 3 decades ago. The issue seems to reassert itself more urgently with each new administration and more particularly with each new fiscal crisis. And now the Biden administration's infrastructure and economic recovery package proposes spending trillions, all packaged with a Buy American caveat. Canada has objections, of course, but effective criticism always rests on a thorough understanding of the counterparty's rationale. So it is useful to consider why Buy American is so consistently deployed by U.S. legislators and policymakers. Put simply, Buy American codifies the idea that restricting foreign inputs will help create U.S. jobs. And while that school of thought, much as I disagree with it, may actually have some merit where other countries are concerned, the exact opposite is true with respect to Canada. Given the extent of integration between our two economies that has developed since the first free trade agreement, the best way to create more American jobs is to deepen that integration even further. We have never been more interdependent. Given our reality, trade barriers against each other are particularly self-defeating and costly. The Buy American policy will actually redound on the American workforce and cost American jobs. It is also important to consider that Buy American is nothing new. It should not be taken as some sort of contempt for or indifference to Canada. Governments led by Republicans and by Democrats at the federal and state levels have imposed Buy American restrictions on public spending for literally generations, or at least as long as I've been paying attention, which is a long time. And to be fair, let's recognize that imposing domestic preferences for public spending is not a uniquely American practice. Trade agreements around the world allow for a certain amount of protectionism. Yes, Canada has opened up its procurement in recent years, but it still fights hard to limit foreign access in certain sectors. The Canadian public actually demands it. You know that better than I. That said, we are concerned by the extent of Buy American provisions in the new U.S. legislation, and we submit that unless Canada is granted an exemption, a carve-out, or if you will, a carve-in, the spending rules will quickly crash into some unforgiving facts. Take New Jersey. Canada is New Jersey's second biggest export market. New Jersey sells more goods to Canada than to its next 2 largest markets combined, and it imports billions worth of Canadian goods. Nearly 180,000 New Jersey jobs depend on smooth cross-border supply chains. Buy American would disrupt those chains to reduce the availability of competitively priced Canadian supplies to New Jersey businesses. That means inefficiency. Inefficiency costs jobs, and that's just in New Jersey. Almost every other state in the United States has the same economic reality. Or take PPE. Canada is a top supplier of personal protective equipment to the United States. Let's not forget the previous administration at the outset of this pandemic attempted to restrict export of N95 masks to Canada and the Caribbean, but then quickly backed off. Why? Because Canada provides inputs to critical PPE and medical supplies to the United States. The dependence is mutual. There's another example we know directly relates to the big economic recovery package. President Biden's infrastructure plan will focus, as we know, on clean energy. By the way, happy Earth Day. Clean energy like wind farms. Quebec companies produce some of the most sought-after wind turbine components in the world. Texas produces more wind energy by far than any other state. It's a natural market marriage. So every week, a CN train pulls out of New Richmond, Quebec, loaded with turbine towers or those gigantic 120-foot-long blades, and makes its way to Chicago and then down the Mississippi to the Gulf. Since 2016, CN has moved about 9,000 Canadian-made turbine components to wind farms along its network in the United States. This trade in wind turbines is a direct result of our 3 consecutive free trade treaties. Restricting it would simply cost American and Canadian jobs. A smaller but perhaps more glaring example is under construction right now in Bettendorf, Iowa. The city is building a new bridge and proposes to install a set of elevators to lift pedestrians and cyclists up from the ground level to the bridge's pedestrian/bike trail. But local officials have realized that some of the necessary parts for the elevators are only made in Canada. Unless some Buy American restrictions are waived, Bettendorf will have to order the parts custom made in the US, doubling the $427,000 cost of the elevators. We would argue that Bettendorf's dilemma, in one form or another, will be repeated across the United States on a vast and expanding scale unless Canada is carved out or carved in, if you will, from Buy American. Canada will need an exemption. It's a reasonable ask, and there's precedent. Back in 2009, Canada obtained an exemption that allowed Canadian businesses to compete for hundreds of billions in stimulus spending after the housing meltdown. And how did that exemption come to pass? Just ask Canada's ambassador at the time, Gary Dewar. He worked with the Steelworkers Union, which had members on both sides of the border, and a collective voice mighty enough to make itself heard in the White House. As Ambassador Dewar likes to tell it, he got the American hard hats involved and appealed to their self-interest. This time around, Canada will need just as compelling a message. We have built a system of mutually assured growth. Let's not disrupt it. The Canadian American Business Council advocates ceaselessly to reduce red tape at the border, streamline and match industrial policies, and generally make commerce between our countries smoother and easier. Buy America may be intuitive for American policymakers. It should be equally intuitive for Canada to vigorously make the self-evident case for an exemption, a carve-out or a carve-in. The CABC is there to help. Our countries need to recover economically, and we need to do it together. We actually have a North American Rebound campaign that I think we've talked about in the past, and I'd be delighted to talk with you about more if you'd like to tonight. So thank you ever so much.
Thank you, Ms. Greenwood. Always a pleasure to have you here. Now we will go to Mr. Agnew for 5 minutes, please.
Well, Mr. Chair and members, thank you once again for the opportunity to meet with the committee. And Scotty, we should really stop meeting like this at committee as well. So since my last appearance, the Canadian Chamber has launched our Canada-US Relations Initiative that covers 5 critical areas in the relationship: the border, environment and natural resources, regulatory cooperation, Buy American, and defense and security supply chain issues. We look forward to engaging with committee members on all the above, but really it's the latter 2 that are the most germane to my appearance with the committee for the next couple of minutes. I don't need to belabor the point to this committee that the Canadian business community's concern with procurement practices in the United States is an ongoing area of concern and risk, and not wanting to risk being shut out of the American market. What I instead want to spend the next few minutes talking about are actually 6 forward-looking ideas to ensure our integration into American supply chains and access to U.S. procurement markets. And we hope that the committee will be able to highlight these in their report to the government in the coming weeks. First, we should look comprehensively at the importance of goods and services. There's a risk that we myopically focus on goods and forget the importance of high-value services. Just last week, the U.S. subsidiary of a Canadian company, for example, was awarded a joint venture contract worth up to $2 billion for design and services related to work for the United States Air Force. This demonstrates the value of services, particularly if you're talking about support contracts that can last years instead of a one and done that comes with the delivery of a physical product. Second, we need to know what we're bringing to the table as Canada. In 2008-2009, when we had the bilateral negotiation with the Americans, we had gone through a fairly bruising process, and I don't think anyone wants to go through that type of arrangement again, given we had just gone through the USMCA discussions. We need to think about how we can be a serious partner. This includes CUSMA implementation, supporting North American supply chain resiliency, leveraging critical minerals, and perhaps even our own procurement practices to think about Buy North American suggestions, particularly, for example, in the defense and security industry. There's tremendous potential to partner and work with U.S. firms also to provide world-class expertise on the clean energy sector. And this includes, for example, partnerships on hydroelectricity facilities or in small modular reactors. Third is to recognize the unique nature of our defense and security industrial base. The DPSA and other arrangements are critical tools for Canada to maintain access to the American market. and we would encourage the committee to explore in its recommendations how these arrangements could be codified to provide further certainty for Canadian companies. The continental industrial base is critical to continental defense and cannot be separated. Fourth is the importance of engaging on emerging Buy Clean initiatives. The recently introduced Clean Futures Act would establish a Buy Clean program that sets performance targets for projects that receive federal funding. It was introduced with a very explicit goal to bolster U.S. manufacturing competitiveness, and we need to ensure that the standards used in its implementation do not shut out Canadian companies from the market. Our approach seeks to address climate challenges while also generating economic opportunities in an environmentally sustainable technologies, goods, and services. And this also means positioning Canada by positively leveraging our low carbon footprint products. Fifth, industry and government collaboration is critical. The Canadian Chamber and our members work closely with the government during the CUSMA negotiations. Another example is when the government and chamber members collaborated last year on the US's 2021 defense appropriations legislation, which did not pass with provisions that would have been detrimental to Canadian exporters in the defense and security industry. The Biden administration's supply chain executive orders thankfully recognize the importance of consultation with allies, and we're calling on the government to engage in those reviews and collaborate with industry to ensure a Canadian view is well represented in those processes. Sixth, and last but not least, is that we need better data. Buy American and Buy America, its cousin, are hideously complex when combined with the WTO GPA commitments, waivers, and various subnational programs. And this comes from someone who has spent over a decade working in trade policy. There's not really solid data in the public domain about Canadian access to US procurement markets. Canadian businesses, and myself personally, would like to get a better handle on the true scope of the problem, and companies likewise want to know where they should invest their business development efforts most effectively. As I said in a recent media interview, there are few that wake up in the morning in Washington thinking about how to do Canadian businesses a favor. Maybe Scotty's perhaps an exception to that. There are a multiplicity of interests inside Washington, and our embassy is ably led by Ambassador Kirsten Hillman, who does a fantastic job on behalf of Canada. But we are at a critical moment in the relationship, and we need to drive home the point of why it is in American self-interest to work with us. The Canadian Chamber looks forward to continuing to work with this committee, and I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Agnew. We will start off with questions. We'll have Mr. Hoback for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, witnesses. It's I feel we should just pour each other a cup of coffee. It's like we're sitting here having coffee like we used to do in the good old days. But Scotty, you're ahead of me. First thing I want to do is I want to thank the governor of North Dakota. He put a gesture of goodwill out this week in offering to vaccinate our truck drivers who cross the border back and forth. So he's going to vaccinate truck drivers out of Manitoba and North Dakota. A good example of good neighbor. What a great neighbor to do that for us. We're struggling here to get enough vaccines in our arms of our essential workers and our population. And to see him do this is just a really good gesture. I wish now we could take that gesture and just build upon it. And I know we talked about the last negotiations on the USMCA, and some of the opportunities lost was to build that North American empire, where Canada, US, and Mexico were working together, taking our efficiencies and our knowledge and putting it together and taking on the world. And we missed a lot of that. And now with Buy America, it seems like we're going to miss it again. Now, one thing, Ms. Greenwood, you talked about, and we did it, I thought, fairly well in the CUSMA negotiations, is we spent a lot of time educating our American colleagues on the importance of the relationship. In COVID times, we can't do it like we did before. So Mr. Doer did it right. He engaged the labor force in the US and did it that way. Have you seen Canada doing that at this point in time? And how effective is that at this point in time?
Thank you so much, Mr. Hoback. Everybody's meeting like this now, right? Everybody's meeting by Zoom, and in many ways, policymakers are easier to reach because they're not traveling very much, and so I think it's continuing to engage in this kind of format until you're able to engage directly. There's an in-person meeting of the Pacific Northwest Economic Region. That's a regional group. It includes state, provincial, and federal leaders. It's going to be in Montana in August. And I think there are a lot of Americans that are going, and there's a hope that it'll be possible for Canadians to come as well. So participating in those sort of bilateral sessions is also a good way to do it. The embassy here does a phenomenal job, as you know, but they can't do it alone. They need everybody helping and leveraging their relationships in order to kind of expand the outreach that you discussed.
How do you take a message? Buy America is talking about creating American jobs, but I often wonder what about the value for American taxpayers? What about value for those jobs? Like, there's a certain point where certain jobs it just doesn't make sense to do in the U.S. They're just too expensive. There's certain componentry that you just don't make in the U.S. It's just too expensive. Where does the U.S. find that balance? When does the taxpayer say, "Wait a minute, that's not value for that job"? Where do you see that fitting into this whole equation?
Yeah, I think it's U.S. companies and U.S. entities that end up having to make the case to their policymakers, right? They say, look at like the thing that I mentioned, the example I mentioned in my comments in Iowa, they're making a bridge. And if they had to, and they're getting the parts for the elevators from Canada, if they had to make them themselves, it would literally double the cost of the bridge. And the city of Bettendorf, Iowa, doesn't have double the funding, so it just becomes self-evident that it just makes sense. Now, there's a difference between buying from Canada and buying from literally anywhere else in the world. And so, as much as I'm a free trader, I think I would in this case go for Canadian exceptionalism. We're not trying to open the door to any country in the whole world. We're trying to make sure that the Canada-U.S. relationship works economically, and I think Americans are generally open to that. And I think especially state and local governments that are so stretched for resources don't want their infrastructure prices double and tripling because of supply chain problems.
So maybe I'll go to you, Mr. Agnew. One of the things we're seeing in Canada is already a shortage of certain componentries. A good example would be lumber. With the Buy American, the $2 trillion that's going to be spent and stimulus coming here in Canada, how do you see the management of our resources such as timber and lumber and steel and cement in this type of scenario? How do you see that functioning and working? Because the U.S. requires it, Canada requires it. Any predictions there?
I actually think one of the biggest opportunities is in critical and rare earth minerals. We have an abundance of these things in the ground, but we're just not very good at getting them out. The U.S. wants its semiconductor industry getting inputs from places that aren't China, and I think that's actually a big leverage thing that we can bring to the table. Now, what we need to do here is make it more cost effective for the private sector to get it out of the ground, because right now the economics just aren't there for projects to be springing up.
Yeah, I know in Saskatchewan, we're actually putting in place one of the first processing centers for the rare earths, different types of rare earths, and we have them here. We know that. We've identified where they're actually even located. It's just like you said, they're not in some place where you just back in with a backhoe and get to work. It's in the middle of nowhere, and one might say, and tough to get to. But one thing we have noticed in both North America is shortages of componentries that were usually coming out of China. Now, has any work been done through the chambers or companies that belong to the chambers and identifying those shortages and seeing what we can do as Canada or US to deal with those shortages or make them up here?
So we are starting that process as part of our Canada-US initiative. And I think one of the questions is, what can governments do to help backstop that for the private sector? Because right now there is a market failure in the industry.
Okay. How much time do I have?
Question, Mr. Hoback. 10 seconds.
You know what? I'll leave it there, Mr. Chair, and let my other colleague go next.
Okay, thank you very much. We have Mr. McKay now for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, both you witnesses. Chair, if we had a frequent flyer program, we should put both Mr. Agnew and Ms. Greenwood on the frequent flyer program. Because their testimony is quite valuable, and I doubt very much that any members in the committee disagree with any component of it. So, Ms. Greenwood, you've been at this for quite a number of years. Your unique value is that you straddle the policy world, the political world, and the practical world. I would be curious as to what kind of clients are coming to your shop and asking you, well, what should we do with this Buy America issue? Because my company sells, I don't know, PCV pipes, or my company sells whatever it is. So what is it, the advice that you're giving to those who are seeking out seeking out your office?
Thank you so much, Mr. McKay. What companies want right now is they want to understand what are the programs involved in the $2 trillion infrastructure plan, to see where there are opportunities. So the first order of business is, what is it? Where does an opportunity exist? Where can we bid on projects? And Canada, as usual, is way ahead of the game. The infrastructure plan, which is what Buy American is part of, isn't law yet. It's a proposal. You could call it a first volley by the Biden administration early on, and it needs to go through the congressional process, and it needs to come out the other end in some sort of a concrete program. So there's going to be a lot of debate. So what people want to know now is, where are there opportunities? And the other thing is, the White House hasn't staffed up fully the office. It's the Office of Management and Budget, where the exceptions will be made and where the recommendations will be taken in for a Buy American exception or a Canadian carve-in, and those people aren't even in their jobs yet. So there's a lot of interest and eagerness to get involved, but at the moment, companies are looking for the opportunities. I would say, just to give you a specific example, cement companies are really important right now. They also have a big impact on the environment, and there is some very exciting technology, including coming out of Canada, where you capture carbon, you can mix it into nanotubes and things like that into cement, for example, and reduce the carbon impact. So I think there will be a lot of opportunities like that, where if Canada if Canada can demonstrate its expertise on sustainable kind of infrastructure, environmental benefits, those are the kind of things that'll be value added and be treated as such, I think, in the U.S.
As you rightly say, it hasn't gone to Congress yet, and as Bismarck once said, you shouldn't watch legislation. There are two things you shouldn't be watching: the making of sausages and the making of legislation. If ever there was a true aphorism, I think the American Congress is probably it. So there is some limited utility at the American congressional level, only because what congressman can say anything negative about Buy America? That's just not politically sound. However, the advice of approaching officials in the White House, that does sound to me to be a useful thing to do. Now, is that advice you're also giving to our ambassador?
Yes, and she actually doesn't need advice from me on that. She's well ahead of all of us. Ambassador Hillman engages very regularly with people at all different levels of the White House and the executive branch. But the thing is, they are still staffing up the place. I know that we're all eager to engage with counterparts, but they're still going through confirmations, and so the Biden administration is still brand new. So we're waiting for a bunch of seats to be filled before we can truly engage in as robustly as I know you're eager to do.
Yeah, fair comment. Turning Mr. Agnew, twice in 1 week, Mr. Agnew, I think this is getting a little bit over. Now, I did not ask you any questions on Tuesday, but as it happens, I co-chair the Permanent Joint Board of Defense, and we are just about to set our agenda for the June meeting in the Pentagon. So I would be interested in your advice with respect to what you think should be on the agenda as far as defense and security spends in that context, where we actually have our American friends captive in the Pentagon.
So the one thing that members have talked to us about is NORAD modernization. There's a fairly large chunk of change that's going to be spent on that, and we just, I think, want to make sure that as Canadian industry that benefits are accruing also to us, given it is a continental defense mechanism. So that would be one very tangible item I would ask you to take back to that group, and I'd be happy to engage with your office further on that.
You have 20 seconds, Mr. McKay.
Okay, well, 10 seconds from Mr. Hoback, 20 seconds from me. Our block friends should be very happy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Monsieur Savard.
Mr. Savard Tremblay, 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for my colleagues for the 8 additional seconds. Greetings to my colleagues and also greetings to our witnesses today. I'd like to ask our witnesses, if they would like to see an exemption. I think it's Ms. Greenwood who spoke to that. Would they like to see an exemption which would provide special access to the American market? If this is not possible, and given that we have a free trade agreement, as has been explained to us, if this is not possible, what type of strategy would you envisage?
So I think what we would want to see is as broad an exemption as possible. Now, I mean, I'd like to think of myself as being a fairly pragmatic person, and I would not be so naive as to think we're going to get a full blanket carve out. And so what we should probably be identifying right now are what are the actual key sectors that will come out of this infrastructure package, and really hone in on those to go to the Americans and say, we actually have some key expertise in areas X, Y, Z, and this is why it's in your interest to make sure that we're not getting whacked with it, and that's why we should be carved out. I would love to think we would get a carve out from the whole thing, but I just am not sure that's going to be, frankly, a viable option.
I would love a blanket carve out or carve in, if you will. That we were successful in 2009 with the economic stimulus, but we were successful late in the game, right? It took a long time to get there, and what happened in the meantime was you had pipelines that were laid in California that had to be pulled up. So I think a broad exemption would be good. I agree with Mr. Agnew about codifying the Defense Production Sharing Agreement. There is precedent for the U.S. and Canada to have reciprocal access to each other's procurement markets, and the defense sector is a perfect example. And if it's good enough for defense, it's good enough for infrastructure, in my opinion. So I think we have to push hard on it, and we have to bring American businesses to the table with our conversations with U.S. policymakers so that they understand. But the target isn't Canada typically. Maybe it is for steel, but it isn't for anything else really from Americans. The target is other countries like China.
Yes, in 2009, the negotiations were long and hard. The situation has changed a little because it's no longer NAFTA. We have CUSMA now. The situation is not the same because there's no chapter on procurement like in CUSMA like there was in NAFTA. So who knows who would win in such a negotiation now, because the American position can be very aggressive. We're quite far from knowing what would happen. But Mr. Agnew, you said that there probably wouldn't be a blanket exemption. What sectors might be the preferred sectors? I have an idea, but perhaps technologies, open industries, which would allow us to win in the awarding of contracts. But there are many American industries that are very advanced in that area.
So I think, given we have nearly every sector of the economy in our membership, I mean, I think, there's a lot of different cases that could be made. I would say that just based on some of the early conversations that we've had with our members, people that are particularly in the clean energy space, hydro facilities, small modular reactors, I think those would be particular areas of, potential strength for us, because as we've seen today with the Leaders Climate Summit, there's a big push in the White House to have the U.S. hit net zero and reduce its emissions. And so that's an area that I think we can come at from an area of strength. And sorry, just more, I think, and of course too, there's a lot of what I would call more traditional infrastructure sectors that have interest, whether steel and aluminum as well. And I think those would be areas that we would hope to see be priorities. And certainly, I know for the Quebec, particularly the aluminum sector, is quite important.
Aluminum is, yes, very important because we have aluminum that is not made from coal, as is the case in China. We have the greenest aluminum in the world. So if we were to insist on this particular dimension, knowing that the new administration in the States is concerned about the environment and environmental issues, perhaps we should look at that in terms of the context of the awarding of contracts. What do you say?
No, absolutely, and I think that is part of the offer that Canada has with our green credentials is how our electricity is done. I think the stat is around 80 to 85% of our electricity comes from clean sources, and I think that's a great narrative to tell and make sure people in Washington understand that.
Merci, Mr. Savard.
Thank you, Mr. Savard Tremblay.
Mr. Green, welcome to the committee. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and to all of the staff that are here tonight, all the members and the witnesses. I thank you for allowing me this opportunity. I'm here very proudly representing Hamilton Centre, which of course, those of you who know, when you drive over the Skyway and you see the industry, you'll know that they call Hamilton Steel City for a reason. So I want to begin just centering in on that. I think a lot about, the ways in which Bain Capital gutted Hamilton Specialty Bar, like a 100-year-old company, generations of workers, hundreds of workers. I think about the ways in which U.S. Steel's restructuring of $2 billion of debt was put on the backs of the pensioners through CCAA. And I can't help but wonder how and to what extent the Buy American provisions have impacted local steel here in Hamilton. And I heard Ms. Greenwood in her comments suggest in presenting a Canadian exceptionalism that Canada wasn't the target, except for maybe steel. And I think I tend to agree on that. So I want to get a sense to begin with, through you, Mr. Chair, to Ms. Greenwood, if she would expand on to what extent she thinks the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009, the Buy American provisions, are similar and different from the Buy America provisions that currently limit Canada's access to the United States sub-federal procurement markets.
Thank you very much for the observation, the question. They're similar. I mean, it's the same movie. We're seeing it again, which is, there are certain industries and certain constituencies in the United States that are very vocal and have a lot of political clout. And we've seen it in steel, we've seen it in lumber, where the U.S. will do something that is not broadly good economic policy that is counter to its trade agreements and obligations, counter to engaging with allies. But nevertheless, the U.S. will have some protectionist mechanisms, and sometimes it works. Bombardier has a facility in upstate New York because they were bidding at the time on the New York City subway cars. Remember back when Bombardier was building rail cars, and they put a facility in Plattsburgh, New York. Why? Because there was a buy local element, and they won the bid. But the challenge, I think, for you is that shows that buy local works. Right. So it's complicated. The other thing I would just hasten to add is you've got to look at the larger picture when you're asking for an exemption. And so, for example, I think in the Canadian budget that was tabled a couple of days ago, there's a digital services tax. And this is something we've seen from other jurisdictions in the world. The U.S., I would predict, will look dimly on taxation of the big digital companies that are based in the U.S. and many of whom are our members. And so I think you have to worry about what frame of mind is the White House in when making these decisions on exemptions, and are they listening? Are the steelworkers? Is the union aligned with your position as they were with Ambassador Dewar's leadership in 2009, or not? And are people grumpy about a Canadian position, perceived Canadian unfair position on digital services, or not? So larger context.
I want to, if I could, through you, Mr. Chair, bring it back to the heart of the matter. Here in Hamilton Centre, the digital taxes are going to be passed on to consumers anyways. It's not going to hit the major digicoms that are coming out of the States. But I do know that our steel sector was hit pretty hard when I thought we had done a lot of work through CUSMA to come up with a new agreement that might have had greater protections and greater abilities for negotiated settlements. And yet it was signed, and it seemed like months later, Trump threw it out the window and imposed tariffs anyway. So I'm wondering, like, to what extent do these agreements matter when regime changes and the leadership of the United States decides to go in a different direction?
Well, I mean, you're right. So the USMCA, the CUSMA, applies to a huge swath of the economy, but government procurement, infrastructure, government dollars on infrastructure is a different thing. So if you're providing steel to American inputs, you get tariff-free access to the U.S. under the trade agreement. But if you're talking about a state or local government that's getting funding from the U.S. federal government on infrastructure, that's when these buy local, buy American provisions come in. So to your original question, it's very much the same fight that we've been having for generations.
So I would put to you that this government has earmarked, I think, $100 billion in COVID recovery. I'm assuming much of it will be in local spending on procurement. Would it then put us in a position where we would be looking at creating like policies, buy Canadian policies that would perhaps have earmarked, Canadian steel on our, rail and transit and on our green energy projects like wind and solar?
So I'll just give you a quick philosophical answer. I think in either case, it's a bad idea. I think Canada and the United States do better when we work together and have full access to each other's markets. So I don't think a tit for tat like that works very well, but I understand the political desire to do it.
What are we left with if we don't have that ability? And let's say, for instance, this Biden administration decides to go in a different direction with steel again.
It's a big, huge relationship. There are lots of levers. I don't know. I'd have to think about a strategy that would help make sure that you don't get disadvantaged in that way. But I'm not prepared to give you a retaliation list right now.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Green. And we will now start our second round. Welcome to the committee, Mr. McLean. You have 5 minutes.
Well, thanks very much, Mr. Chair. And I appreciated the witness. Particularly, I'm going to start with my questions to Mr. Agnew, and I wish I'd had a briefing of yours ahead of time because I was scrolling down notes like crazy here, trying to talk, ask some good questions here for you. You did talk about critical minerals, and you did talk about clean energy, and you did talk about defense, and I'd really like to go into those as far as how we cooperate and work together with our American partners here in these. And we've recently done a study of this at the Natural Resources Committee as well, and a bunch of weakness here has been exposed. Number one, every critical element is going to take a 10-year mine development process, and probably longer because of new legislation in Canada applying to mines called the Impact Assessment Act, which has been disastrous across the board. And so the length of time to develop those actual industries versus the time you actually set up a facility to fortify them, manufacture those metals, which is about 18 months, is a big disconnect. And in that 10-year or so cycle, you've got a cartel-like provider around the world, mostly China, in critical minerals that will continue to move that price up and down. So those mines in that process will become unviable, like in the United States with the Mountain Pass facility. So tell me what you think between Canada and the US we should be doing in order to buffer those cartel-like tendencies to make our critical elements unviable at certain points in that commodity cycle.
No, well, thank you for the question. So I think there are two aspects to this that are worth exploring. I think there's a whole lot more, but just interested in keeping it focused, I'll say two pieces. One is the domestic one. And so there's things that are within our control solely about regulation, impact assessments, labor, infrastructure. What do we need to do to make it viable for companies to take out of the ground? That's one element. The second is when we're talking about what the Canadian and American governments can do together, how can we correct the market failure of it not yet being commercially viable? And so this is where I think there could be potential for government, I don't want to say backstops, but for lack of a better word, I'll say backstops. So how can we use procurement, for example, as a tool to create financial incentives for companies to see a reason to take this out of the ground and know that there's a buyer on the other end ultimately, because that is what companies need to know, is if I take it out and then someone else goes to process it, will there be someone there to buy it? So that is, I think, where the governments could come in. And because we have such a joint sort of supply chain when it comes to, for example, defense products, how can we use the government purchase of defense equipment to incentivize the critical minerals industry?
Okay, so but interesting, because the labeled, the American business model is about driving costs out of supply all the way through the supply chain. And in times of commodity cycles, driving that cost out means going towards the lowest cost provider. And that is China half of the time. And so we do put ourselves back in there. How do we get a North American supply chain in critical minerals that will buffer that tendency to drive costs to the lowest provider?
I think you need to create the demand in order for there to be the supply. And again, this comes back to what I was saying about the people that are taking it out of the ground and refining it need to know there's a buyer on the other end for it. So whether that is governments for defense contracts, or whether that is an automotive company who's then going to use it to make chips that go into your vehicle, you need to create the demand before people are going to take it out of the ground.
Okay, I'll move on. Vaccines, let's look at vaccines and how the US now is pretty much on its way as far as getting its population vaccinated. In Canada, we have a closed border with a no travel zone from the US right now. And maybe Ms. Greenwood can answer this question. How do we get a North American position going forward where we can continue to have that cross-border activity where we share vaccines? So at points of national emergencies where we look at ourselves as an actual North American bloc and have similar health outcomes, and therefore we're not having as much interaction with others, but as far as our ability to travel back and forth, we share those critical vaccines, for instance, that can be manufactured on both sides of the border as well. Is that something that could fit under this realm?
Absolutely. I think that's I think we have to learn the lesson of the pandemic and of COVID and figure out how we do it better going forward, because this unfortunately isn't going to be the only public health crisis that we face. So I totally agree with the idea. And in fact, that's what our organization is all about, is figuring out how Canada and the United States can face these things together. Though, sir, if I might, for just 10 seconds on critical minerals, I think I agree with what Mr. Agnew said. I would add to your question about cost and China being a low-cost provider, I think something sort of like the carbon border adjustment tax is going to be what it takes. I think government policy has got to make it more expensive to source from China. And so carbon border adjustment, and we'd have to think about other, pollution, human rights, whatever adjustments you make and account for, are the way that you bring those costs up higher so that North American companies can compete.
Thank you, Mr. McLean. Thank you, Mr. McLean. We'll now go to Ms. Romanado for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank the witnesses for being here again this evening. It's always a pleasure to hear from you. I can't imagine, as a military family, Canada and the United States not working together. I mean, we look at NORAD, we look at the North Warning System, we look at the Northwest Passage, we look at 9/11. And I cannot imagine Canada and the United States not working together in terms of continental defense. Ms. Greenwood, you brought up something that has kind of piqued my interest, because I used to work at CN Rail, and I've been watching recently the dual bidding between CN and CP for Kansas City Southern, which would be an incredibly interesting railway. When you think of it, it would basically be mirroring CUSMA. So it would be marrying all three partners and traffic that would be able to flow amongst them. And when I look at that, and I look at a company in my riding, which is Irudevtech, an aerospace company that creates landing gear, that actually created the landing gear for the lunar module, that actually has companies set up in Ohio, in Michigan, in Washington State, because we are just so integrated. So I'd like to ask you if you could elaborate a little bit more on your North American rebound, because I think that's what we need to look at when we're looking at Canada, the US. It cannot be just Canada or the US. I think we are integrated and we're going to continue to be integrated. So if you could talk a little bit about the North American rebound versus Canada's recovery and the US's recovery.
Sure, thank you so much. So North American Rebound Campaign, and check it out, Google it, and you'll see it in different places. It came about actually out of a conversation with the Quebec Delegate General in the U.S., Catherine Dubié. She and I were having early in the pandemic where governors of states in New England were getting together. Remember, cast your mind back to early in the pandemic where jurisdictions were trying, including, we're trying to figure out how to get PPE for their own population. And so New England states said let's all form a buying block so that we're not driving the price up amongst each other. And Quebec sort of said, well, wait a minute, we're part of you economically, so we want to be part of that block. And so Catherine and I were talking about that, and we said, look, the truth is the Canada, the United States writ large should be trying to acquire PPE, share it amongst ourselves, manufacture it, get all the inputs and all of that. And so we launched this North American Rebound Campaign, and the U.S. Chamber, the Canadian Chamber, the National Association of Manufacturers, all sorts of local chambers of commerce, individuals across Canada, United States, provinces have signed up to say, we agree that it's important that whatever the question is, the answer is Canada and the United States are in it together. So that's how it started, and it continues to grow in numbers and support, and the community that's building hopefully will push back against some of these Buy American provisions. I mentioned New Jersey in my testimony because unfortunately the state legislature there just passed a Buy American provision that Quebec and Ontario in particular were very vocal about pushing against, but it was a fait accompli. So anyway, that's what the North American Rebound is all about. We'll continue to build it digitally and to invite people and businesses to sign, and then we'll activate the communities in targeted congressional districts to try to support a Canadian carve-in to Buy America. One of the things I will say is North America is more challenging in the United States because when you're adding Mexico into the equation, it's an entirely different conversation. So when we talk about North American Rebound, we're actually talking about Canada-US. And it's not because Mexico isn't important. It really is important. It's just that the issues, especially in the American imagination, the issues with respect to Mexico are entirely different than the opportunities that we have with Canada.
Thank you. And I know I only have about 30 seconds. I wanted to give Mr. Agnew a chance to jump in. If there's anything you'd like to add with respect to our collaboration with respect to defense, as I said, it's something that's near and dear to me.
So I think the one thing that we're thinking through right now with respect to the DPSA is it's an arrangement that doesn't have sort of full treaty status in the same way that, say, USMCA does. Generally speaking, it works, but we do hear sort of anecdotal reports from companies about it not being as functioning as well as it should be on the margins. And so we would like to think about how is it that we can codify that a bit more strongly to make sure that we're not being shut out of potential opportunities.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Romanado. Monsieur Savard-Tremblay, vous avez...
You have 2.5 minutes, Mr. Savard-Tremblay.
Is he on? Oui. Monsieur Savard-Tremblay, vous avez deux...
You have 2.5 minutes, Mr. Savard-Tremblay. Chair, if you could take away this comment from my time. Very often the sound cuts out, so I don't hear you giving me the floor. I don't know why. No problem. No, I know it's a technical issue, but it does happen often. I don't know if you hear right now. I'm hearing. Okay. My question is for Ms. Greenwood. We know that Mr. Biden has already said that he wanted to open the Canadian-American border. There is a will to do that, and he would like to establish an open border to have a dialogue. But what are some good arguments for negotiating that?
Well, some of the best arguments have to do with services, professional services that are key to our economic recovery. You know, we've done a pretty good job in Canada, the United States, keeping trucks going back and forth to keep grocery stores' shelves filled, but we have not done a good job with people in professional services. When it comes to, for example, artificial intelligence, we have a company in CABC called Context Air, wonderful Canadian company. All of their customers are in the US. And so what they like to say is their people are the supply chain, and their people can't get back and forth across the border right now. So I think figuring out with vaccines and testing and a risk-based approach, not a political approach, we've got to get people going back and forth across the border again.
Yes, we have to be able to cross the border. And with vaccines in the United States, the vaccination rate is much higher. But if, for example, Canada set out a condition to have a certain access, could that be a bargaining chip for negotiations?
If I understand your question, I think yes. I mean, I think Canadian companies need access to visit their customers and vice versa. So I think that's something, again, with hopefully this lack of vaccination challenge will be behind us in a few weeks' time, right? There's a lot of vaccine available now in the U.S. and in the world, and hopefully it'll be made available in Canada so that we can resume our back and forth commerce in earnest.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Savard-Tremblay.
Green, Mr. Green, you have 2.5 minutes.
Mr. Agnew, the Canadian Chamber of Commerce issued a statement after Biden signed the order saying that it's going to have a chilling effect on businesses that will hit harder in Canada. You went on to state that Buy American restrictions remain a perennial problem for Canadian businesses seeking to address government contracts with our largest trading partner. You said that the rules have progressively tightened over the years, and today's announcement represents another unhelpful step to make it more difficult for Canadian businesses to secure contracts in the US. What steps would you like to see Canada take in response to this show of American protectionism?
So there's a couple of things that we would suggest. One is going back to an earlier comment I was alluding to around seeking very targeted exemptions from the Buy American sort of program for the upcoming infrastructure bill. So once we see what's on offer and where they're going to be targeting, let's identify the sectors that we should get an exemption for and go after.
Have you identified, through you, Mr. Chair, have you identified steel as being one of those?
We have not sort of finalized our process with members, but I would imagine that steel, aluminum, and clean energy would be products at this point.
One of the things that that strikes me is that, particularly to the steel that's coming out of Hamilton here, is that it's very hard to tell at what point it begins to be Canadian steel and is not, because it's shipped back through all of its various forms. And so I just want to wonder if what steps we should be taking to kind of proactively make sure that that's accounted for, whether that's the industrial planning domestically or finding ways to adjust our own procurement policies, for instance, here in Canada to reflect our steel sector.
Well, I think there are things that we can do, domestically to help our sector. But actually, what I would say for the steel industry that's important is showing the U.S. that we're serious about tackling the problems with excess capacity in the global steel market. And to go back to what Scotty was saying earlier about, how do you sort of link issues between folks in the White House? I think going to the White House and saying that we're serious about tackling overcapacity would show that we're a serious player, and I think make it less likely to be hit with a Buy American policy on steel products.
Okay, thank you for these responses, and I certainly look forward to further interventions from our other witnesses. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Green. We'll now go to Mr. Nader for 5 minutes, please.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses, and some interesting ground that's been covered so far. And I'm certainly subbing in this week for Ms. Alislove. So my questions are coming from Ms. Alislove, and they've been touched on a few different points so far. So I may be repeating a little bit, but I do want to have her questions on the record. So she wanted me to ask about Chapter 13 of CUSMA and whether or not there would be an appetite or an interest to reopening that section of the CUSMA agreement, and what options we as Canadian lawmakers should be taking to push that issue south of the border. And I'll open that up to both witnesses.
I know MCUSA chapters by name, not by number, so you're gonna have to just remind me which one that is, unfortunately.
Sorry, but relating to procurement.
Right. So my personal advice would be we don't really have time and luxury of a renegotiation right now of the CUSMA. I think what we should instead be going to the Americans with is actually a list of other things that we're helping them on and why we're a valued partner rather than trying to reopen the deal that we just finished.
If you want me to address that, I'll give you a Southern colloquialism. Should you reopen CUSMA? Heck no. We don't have the ability to get it through this Congress, and you risk coming out with something that is much worse than what you have now. So, I totally agree with Mr. Agnew that you just got to negotiate better deals along the way. You don't want to change the rules of the road now, because it's you won't get what you want. You won't get it done, and you won't get what you want, and it could be worse for Canada.
And worse for Canada is certainly not an outcome that any of us want to be going down. Looking at kind of where Canada and the United States kind of do business back and forth across the border. I know Ms. Greenwood, you talked about some of the examples in your opening comments. Curious if you had any thoughts on at the state level, which individual states we should be focusing on in terms of our lobbying efforts, in terms of then having the states lobby their federal government beyond what's already been mentioned.
Well, I hate to say this, but they're all important, because Canada is the first or second. Hello there. Is the first or second commercial partner to every single one of the U.S. states, and they're all important for different reasons. You look at Alaska and Florida, and they're pretty influential when it comes to the cruise industry. And you look at a state like Kentucky, and they've got bourbon that people kind of like, and then you look at Tennessee and their water cooler. So it's just every state is important, and luckily Canada has a network of consulates across the United States that have regional responsibility, and also has these provincial offices. We've mentioned the Quebec office. We haven't mentioned the Ontario and the Alberta offices, which work really hard every day with states, counterparts. So the answer is all of them. If I had to pick, one or two top of mind right now for reasons this committee knows well, I would say Michigan and Illinois are pretty important, but those are for some other infrastructure reasons.
Looking forward in the next I guess 18 months or so until the next set of midterms in the United States, it seems like they're constantly in that cycle. What do you see as the biggest risk to Canada in terms of the time between now and that next set of midterms in terms of dealing with this current Congress south of the border?
Wow, great question. I think there's a risk that you don't get the exemptions you need while you've got a group of people that are willing to do business. And that you go into a period of uncertainty with Congress. It's so evenly divided in the United States Senate that you don't know post 2022 who your dance partner is going to be. So you want to get as much done as you can now and get it sort of entrenched so that you can withstand whatever the next election is.
Great, thank you. And that's all I had for questions at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nader. We will now end this round with Ms. Bendaim, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. Always wonderful to have you at committee, and thank you for spending your Thursday night with us. So I did want to come back to something that was mentioned at the very beginning by several witnesses. We were talking a little bit about the 2009 stimulus spending in the United States. We heard testimony early on in the study that the exemption that Canada did receive in that context came in 2010, and that it came at a time that was actually too late for a lot of Canadian companies to bid on many of the contracts that we would have been interested in. And so my question to you, Ms. Greenwood, is given that we are still at fairly early stages of the Biden administration's announced plan, and as you mentioned, there are several hurdles still to be crossed and changes that are likely going to be made. Just keeping in mind our previous experience, how long do you think we have? And you mentioned as well that the Office of Management and Budget may be understaffed at the moment. Do you think that that's something that's going to persist for a while? And is that going to be something that we should also keep in mind when thinking about timelines?
Thank you very much, and it's good to see you. I think you have it sort of between now and the end of this calendar year to get organized, but you can engage with governors now, right? Because governors and mayors will be making their own procurement decisions, and so identifying key projects that the Canadian businesses want to be part of is something I think you can lay the groundwork with governors and mayors while the feds get staffed up. So that's what that, and you can do that immediately.
Okay, and you also mentioned earlier in testimony and the example of New Jersey, I believe it was, that already did pass legislation at the state level. Is there anything based on your experience with that situation that we can learn from, in terms of your conversations or others?
I have a self-interested answer, which is if we could have ramped up the North American Rebound digital campaign to get, tens and thousands of people in New Jersey to write into their state legislature and say, hey, we're going to lose money and we're going to lose our competitive advantage if we box out Canada, that would have been good. We had a digital effort during USMCA targeting Democratic members of Congress to try to help get it across the goal line. And so I think engaging in smart campaigns with real American voters who talk to their officials is a key part of it.
And what role do you see? And I'm turning to both you and Mr. Agnew. What role do you see for Canadian business and Canadian industry? Can that type of mobilization on this side of the border at this time be effective through the North American Rebound campaign or other campaigns?
I think so. Canadian businesses have very good contacts down in the United States with it, be it suppliers, vendors, whoever it is. We have contacts that are good with the U.S. Chamber and others. And so I think it's mobilizing those folks and understanding why it's in their self-interest to be advocates for us because, let's be honest, they carry more weight in D.C. certainly than a Canadian-based organization would.
I guess, but before Ms. Greenwood might want to jump in, being very practical and given the timeline that we just heard, which appears to me to be quite short, practically speaking, how do we get that done? Do you believe that industry and the business community is looking for the government to organize a group, or is this something that the private sector can organize itself through associations like yours, Ms. Greenwood?
Well, I think the answer is both. Government tends to have convening power. So if you're present for something, you can get business leaders to show up. Part of the hard part of this, though, is businesses in the U.S. have their hair on fire about other things all the time, and so making sure that this rises to the top, like buy local preferences, are really important because they make things more expensive. But are they more important than the corporate tax rate, or are they more important than some other sort of labor mobility or labor force issue? So that's that's part of the difficulty. So I think you got to convene the conversations and get people to remind each other of how this is coming and it's challenging and we ought to address it now.
Mr. Chair, just before I end, if I have a few seconds, I'd just like to clarify. Over the course of this meeting, there was talk interchangeably of Buy America and Buy American. I just wanted to put on the record that Canada is largely exempted from Buy American. Buy America is really where the crux of the matter is and the topic of this study.
Thank you very much, Ms. Benayan. Thank you very much again, Ms. Greenwood and Mr. Agnew, for coming to our committee and sharing your thoughts and advice with us. I'm sure it'll really help in our deliberations as we go forward. So thank you again on behalf of the committee.
Happy to be the warm-up act for Jerry Diaz as usual.
Okay. I will ask for a few moments to suspend so we onboard the next panelist.
Thank you.
Committee. I would like to now introduce our next panelist from Canada Buildings Union, Trade Unions. We have Sean Strickland, Executive Director. From Unifor, we have Jerry Diaz, National President, and Angelo De Caro, Director of Research. And from the United Steelworkers, we have Ken Newman, National Director for Canada National Office, and Meg Gingrich, Assistant to the National Director. Mr. Strickland, good to see you again. Welcome back to the committee. I'll turn the floor over to you for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and very nice to see you and members of the committee as well. And thanks very much for everything that you do for Canada and particularly the important work of this committee. My name is Sean Strickland. I'm the Executive Director of Canada's Building Trades Unions, the Canadian arm of North America's Building Trades Unions, an organization composed of 14 international unions and over 3 million workers. We work closely with our Washington office to coordinate and support issues that affect our members on both sides of the border. Today, we'll talk about the impact of Buy America policies on skilled trades workers in Canada and the US, and share with the committee 2 recommendations. 1, the government of Canada demonstrate to the US the importance of having barrier-free trade with Canada. 2, to advocate for the creation of a bilateral or North American procurement policy that will permanently address Buy America policies. In the recent roadmap for a renewed US-Canada partnership, President Biden and Prime Minister Trudeau launched a strategy to strengthen Canada-US supply chain security and agreed to reinforce our deeply interconnected and mutually beneficial economic relationship. But since then, as we all know, President Biden is committed to a Buy American policy, and these protectionist measures aren't new. They have existed since 1933 and were recently toughened by former President Trump. President Biden is aiming to increase protectionist procurement requirements even further. He is planning to make it harder for foreign companies, including Canada, to receive waivers to the rules by creating a Made in America director position in the White House to centralize control. These waivers in the past gave exemptions to Canadian manufacturers, suppliers, and contractors when bidding on American contracts. While these measures aim to protect jobs, policies like this can result in project delays in the construction industry because of our intertwined supply chains. So I'll give you two examples. A small example in Bettendorf, Iowa, prohibiting the use of Canadian imports could double the $427,000 cost of an elevator construction. Certain traction elevator components, elevator guide rails, and additional components required to make the structure compliant with the Americans with Disabilities Act are manufactured only in Canada. The city spent 6 months analyzing alternatives and found no known elevator manufacturers in the USA that produce the required parts. Without a Buy America waiver, which is yet to be granted, the city will either have to custom build the components, doubling the cost, or disassociate from the federal grant. Another example, larger example, the private developer of a proposed high-speed rail line from the outskirts of Los Angeles to Las Vegas, worth approximately $5 billion, blamed Buy America compliance for blocking its plans. The company sought low-cost financing through the Federal Railroad Rehabilitation and Improvement Financing Program, subjecting to Buy America policies. Secretary of Transportation suspended consideration of the loan request because the sponsors were having difficulty satisfying Buy America requirements. At a time when we're facing economic uncertainty due to the pandemic, we need to strengthen supply chains between our two countries, not impede them. According to a GAO report, U.S. suppliers win more than 10% of Canadian federal government contracts worth roughly $1 billion, whereas Canadian suppliers win about 0.2% of U.S. federal contracts worth about $600 million. The Canadian government awards more contracts by value to U.S. suppliers by many orders of magnitude more than any other country. In the Canada-U.S. roadmap, our leaders committed to increased climate ambitions and to coordinate cooperation to meet the Paris Agreement and net zero objectives. So when we talk about procurement of construction materials, Canadian building and construction materials are some of the greenest in the world. Relying on Canada-U.S. supply chains reduces emissions associated with transportation. Our energy and electricity systems are amongst the cleanest in the world. Our manufacturers are highly efficient and generally emit less carbon pollution than similar production facilities in most foreign markets. Canada is a leader in producing low carbon steel. Aluminum producers have the lowest carbon footprint in the world. We're a leader in developing, deploying cutting edge cement technology that reduces emissions, all of which will help Canada and the US meet climate goals. What we need is the development of a longer term strategic solution to the issue. Recognizing the integration of the US-Canada supply chain is also a green supply chain. What we need is a Buy North American strategy to protect Canadian and American jobs. Workers shouldn't have to pay the cost of their livelihood every time there's a change in administration. Industry needs policy continuity to grow and create jobs for Canadian workers. Cities and towns need to address aging infrastructure rather than comb through difficult changes in procurement policies following an election cycle. We need a long-term Buy North American policy that protects workers in both our countries. I thank you for your time, Mr. Chairman, and look forward to the discussion and questions from the committee.
Thank you so much, Mr. Strickland. Now I'll turn the floor over to Mr. Diaz and Mr. DeCaro for a total of 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Honorable Chair and members of the committee. My name is Jerry Dias. I'm the national president of Unifor. I represent over 315,000 working people across the country in nearly every industrial sector. I'm joined by Unifor's National Research Director, Angelo DeCaro. I was glad to learn back in February that this special committee was struck. Our union has had a front row seat to Canada-US relations over the past 4 years. I can only characterize it as bizarre and unstable, and I think, frankly, I'm being diplomatic when I say it that way. The newly introduced Biden administration brings hope for a more constructive working relationship with Canada. So far, signs are good. The president's desire to lead on climate policy, to speak forcefully about the rights of workers, trade unions, and holding law-breaking employers to account is impressive. His commitment to racial justice and equality, fair taxation, social infrastructure, and good jobs are timely and frankly needed. In our view, at least on paper, this administration aligns with the type of forward-looking economy uniform members want to see and what was evident in this week's budget. Nothing guarantees a stable relationship. But what we've seen so far suggests we're off on the right foot. February's joint Canada-US roadmap is a product of that. It was a signal of a constructive relations not seen in years. How we nurture this policy alignment is important. Tough conversations regarding Buy American rules attached to the multi-trillion-dollar American Jobs Plan and American Families Plan are bound to happen. But let's think strategically. Buy American rules are not a surprise. They've existed for nearly 100 years. Tightening rules was a key plank in the Biden-Harris election campaign. It's a policy space the U.S. has managed to preserve despite trade deals. This is unlike Canada, who ceded much of this ground at the WTO and in CETA. There's no denying Buy American rules pose challenges to export-dependent workplaces in Canada. In 2018, for instance, President Trump ratcheted up U.S. content rules for federally funded transit purchases from 60 to 70%. The move resulted in the direct layoff of dozens of uniform members at our new Flyer assembly plant in Winnipeg. Meanwhile, that same year, Canada procured $1 billion in transit goods through Via Rail. Canadian content requirements were intentionally omitted. This resulted in assembly work performed at a U.S. factory. Buy America is a problem. Some of what Biden floated has me concerned, no doubt. But boy, we do a good job of making things even worse for ourselves. The question is, what do we do? Asking the White House for blanket exemption to Buy American, even if it's the best outcome, is frankly not really realistic. Steve Verhoeven has said that as much to this committee. What matters is how we identify those points of alignment and emphasize the mutual benefit in areas such as sustainability, high labor standards, critical supply chains, and fair balanced trade. Building a resilient and sustainable EV supply chain, for instance, without Canada is nearly impossible. I believe there are opportunities to explore a modern EV auto pact. Attaching low carbon requirements to procurement fits the U.S. sustainability agenda. Crafting a low carbon buy clean procurement strategy between our two countries is advantageous for sectors with a low greenhouse gas footprint like Canadian forestry and aluminum. Bringing creative ideas to the White House, we will argue, is critical. So is building close relations with the new centralized oversight body for Made in America. But regardless of any waivers or exemptions Canada might secure, government must take action on its own accord. This week, we witnessed a historic budget, delivering more than $100 billion in stimulus spending. As this gets debated in a minority parliament, why not attach it to a national program for sustainable local procurement in Canada? Why not a national policy for high labor standards in purchasing contracts? Or a requirement that a portion of spending is earmarked for Indigenous communities or economically depressed regions? Our recovery strategy cannot rest simply on Canadian business securing public contracts from a foreign country. I'm certainly not a fan of Canadians getting shut out of work, but I'm also not a fan of sitting back helplessly while there are tools in our toolbox. I appreciate the committee's invitation to this hearing and your work on behalf of the country. I look forward to your questions, and thank you. Angela.
Thank you, Ms. Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Diaz. And finally, Mr. Newman, Ms. Gingrich, you have the floor for a total of 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to begin by thanking you, the clerk, the committee staff, the interpreters, and all the committee members for the opportunity to make a submission and join you here today. As you said, my name is Ken Newman. I'm the National Director for the United Steelworkers in Canada. The United Steelworkers Union represents 225,000 members active in Canada and another 600,000 members in the United States. Our members are employed in industries in virtually every economic sector, including those directly on North American trade. Because of the binational structure, we have a unique understanding of the importance of ensuring strong, integrated American markets. In the United States, things are moving quickly. President Biden on March 31st announcement of American Jobs Plan, including a commitment to invest $2 trillion in transit systems, home and buildings, and water infrastructure, could have serious implications for Canada. This is especially true as it is widely expected the upcoming infrastructure bill will expand Buy America provisions to cover more products and sub-federal infrastructure projects that receive federal funding. Infrastructure projects rely on products such as steel, aluminum, and wood products, of many which are currently produced in Canada. We must move quickly to ensure that Canada is not left out of these plans. As our Steelworkers International President, Tom Conway, recently said while applauding President Biden's overall initiatives, Canada is not the problem facing U.S. manufacturing and workers. Cooperation between Canada and U.S. will build on our longstanding and productive trading relationship. So how productive is that relationship? As you may know, the Canadian aluminum and steel industry alone shipped $16 billion worth of products to the United States every year. That is 90% of all Canadian steel exports and 2/3 of total aluminum revenue. Over 38,000 Canadians are directly employed in these industries, and over 140,000 more jobs are connected to them indirectly. Canada's forest sector employs over 200 workers directly, and the U.S. is our top destination, accounting for about 75% of our softwood lumber exports alone. Our supply chains are already heavily integrated. In the auto sector, for instance, what starts out as a steel slab may cross the border 5 or 6 times for processing before it ends up in its final form. For the strong economic relationship between the two countries to continue, we have to secure an across-the-board exemption to the Buy American legislation. We need a binational procurement strategy that emphasizes the use of high-quality, environmentally friendly products made in North America. And we need to finally get a solution to the decades-long softwood lumber dispute. During the previous U.S. administration, steelworkers stood strong against Sections 232 tariffs on Canadian steel and our aluminum. A decade ago, we worked with the Obama administration to create a North American strategy that benefited workers on both sides of the border. Now, as part of a plan to continue building on a relationship, we are advocating for a North American Buy Clean strategy, which would prioritize consideration of environmental impact of materials used in public construction projects. A recent Buy Clean report prepared by Blue Green Canada, an alliance of labor and environmental organizations founded by the steelworkers, demonstrates that steel, aluminum, cement, and wood products produced in Canada have some of the lowest carbon emissions in the entire world. These relatively low environmental impacts fit the stated goals of President Biden and our Canadian government and would protect and create jobs. Canada's timber products do represent an opportunity for reduced carbon impact. But before the US and Canada can work together in forestry sector, we have to see a long-term deal that addresses the softwood lumber dispute for once and for all. As it stands, thousands of workers face layoffs every time the United States reimposes softwood lumber tariffs. While the NAFTA dispute resolution system made its way into CUSMA, an overall resolution to the softwood dispute was not part of that negotiations. The severity of the problem is currently masked by sky-high lumber prices. We need to find a solution before prices drop again and workers end up paying the price. If Canada approaches the situation strategically, United Steelworkers believe there's an opportunity for Canadian workers to benefit from President Biden's massive infrastructure, environment, and job investment. To that end, we will continue to work both in Canada and the United States to promote a clean energy North American manufacturing sector. We cannot let this opportunity pass us by. Thank you again, and I also look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Newman. We will now proceed with our first round. Mr. Strahl, you have the floor for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to everyone for being here to present to us today. Again, it's good to see many of you were also a part of our Line 5 discussion, and I think we certainly saw the value of organized labor standing up for over 20,000 jobs that dispute puts at risk, and so we certainly appreciated your input. And certainly in the case of Mr. Strickland, your organization standing up for Keystone workers, et cetera, who were impacted by the decision of the U.S. administration. It's good to see you fighting for Canadian projects and Canadian workers. And indeed, in that case, workers on both sides of the border. And that's kind of where I want to talk to you, Mr. Strickland. You mentioned at the beginning the international nature of some of these organized labor organizations. How have you had discussions with your counterparts in the U.S. about how you can work together to advocate for workers who will be negatively impacted on both sides of the border? And what does that strategy look like? We heard in the previous panel a need to maybe make the case for Canada to U.S. lawmakers, make the case to that it's often better for projects to use Canadian materials and that are made by Canadian workers. So maybe you can share some of that cross-border work or cooperation that your organization participates in every day.
Sure. Well, thank you very much for the question, MP Strahl. And we certainly are working with our counterparts in Washington, D.C., and I'll be interested to hear what Ken has to say, because he's also an international union. And I can also add that the Canadian Embassy has been very active on this file as well, and has reached out to the leadership, the Canadian directors of the building trades. And we are facilitating discussions with the Canadian directors and also with the general presidents of our 14 affiliated unions that are based in DC. And so part of the challenge that we have is having to communicate the importance of this issue and the impacts that it could have on Canadian workers. And we have to work, and we're continuing to work, and we're using the support of our staff in Washington, D.C., to highlight numerous examples of projects that without bringing it to their attention, it's not really on their radar. So there's, I gave examples in my opening address about projects on an elevator in Iowa rather, and a large LRT project in Vegas and California. But there's numerous other examples, bridge bearings and housing in Cleveland, Ohio. Water filters for wastewater treatment plants. So we got a list of 15 wastewater treatment plants in major areas, major metropolitan areas in the United States of America, who have slowdowns because of previous Buy America policies. And so part of our challenge is really educating externally and also internally about how important this is to Canadian workers. And our leadership in the U.S. is supporting us in these deliberations.
Okay, great. And I will go to Mr. Newman for this next question. He maybe wants to touch on that one as well, about working with their international partners. You mentioned a number of times about an integrated clean energy or clean manufacturing strategy. Have the steelworkers put any thought into, we talked again in the previous panel, we touched on it briefly, about a carbon border adjustment tax where there would be a way to determine whether or not goods manufactured in other countries, specifically China, whether they should be subject to an adjustment tax based on the inputs that they have to put into producing their steel and aluminum, for instance. Have the steelworkers thought about that? Do they have a position on that, and would any of that apply, do you think, to maybe taking on the real target of Buy America through other means rather than a catch-all approach that does catch cleaner produced goods like our steel and aluminum in that same net?
Well, thank you very much for that question, and you hit the nail on the head. We've been calling for that with this government. We've laid it out several times that there should be a carbon border adjustment, because Canada, as you heard in my testimony, is that we have some of the cleanest steel and the aluminum that there is. And the fact is that that would prevent some of the dumping that takes place and some of the stuff that comes from offshore. So we fully endorse the fact that there should be a carbon border adjustment. With respect to Mr. Strickland's comments, I mean, our union has been in the forefront. And let me just say this, there's been I think there's been a reset in the relationship between Canada and the United States. If you look at under the former administration, it was fairly cloudy for us for a long time when we were seen as a security threat when they brought about the steel and aluminum tariffs. We happened to be in the U.S. at the time when our International Executive Board that day put out a resolution saying that, look, Canada is the furthest thing from a national security threat. And that still is the case today. So I see an opportunity here because we do have a reset. You have the President of the United States and you've got the Prime Minister of Canada. I think they have a similar vision when it comes to the prospect of the environmental, the green side of things. So, but from our union is that we're working on both sides of the border. We're working with the Canadian government, the embassy, Meg, working with our lobbying office in Washington, working with also the embassy there as well. So we're reaching out to our allies because, as President Conway says, that look at Canada and the United States have a longstanding relationship in regards to trade. Why would you want to punish your best neighbor? And when you talk about, all of us, I'm sure, have crossed borders and seen them trucks line up for miles and miles. They ain't running empty. They're running with products being made in each other's country, being produced by workers that we represent on this side of the border or the other side. And that's what trade's all about. And that's what I think Canada and the United States have a long-standing history. So I think there's an opportunity that we should not miss. And I'm sure that all of us are going to be working as hard as possible to make sure that we overcome the Buy America, because also remember that the American market is 10 times larger than Canada. I mean, we're small compared to, I look at the big elephant and the mouse. That's what it really boils down to. So, but we're working as hard as we possibly can.
Thank you, Mr. Strahl. We will now go to Mr. Sarai for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you to the witnesses. It's great to have many of you back again. I always like reminding myself that I'm son of a United Steelworker employee, and my brother's a Unifor employee, and I've got BC Trades schools and colleges in my training institutes in my riding. So a great affiliation with all of you, and thanks for having you on. I think you shouldn't use the analogy of the elephant and the mouse. You guys are pretty mighty, and that elephant gets scared of you when you put your heads together. And I'm actually very happy to hear that you're getting a lot of cooperation from the Canadian Embassy and the government and in helping that. And this is a time we actually need you as well to use your brothers and sisters down south to help support some of these punitive ideas that are going around. My first question is to Mr. Dias. In 2009, in the 2009 Recovery Act, we saw the U.S. administration implement stringent Buy America provisions. What was Labor's reaction then in Canada and the U.S., and how can we use that maybe perhaps to deal with this current situation?
Well, coming out of the 2009, we had the administration at that time in the U.S., and it was the Recovery Act. You know, this isn't new to us, by the way. The whole issue of Buy American provisions is not new. We've been dealing with this historically, generations, frankly. So in Canada, what we did was we fought for exemptions, and I think we got exemptions in about 37 states that allowed Canada to bid on their procurement. But ultimately, what Canada gave up at that time was the opportunity for U.S. companies to bid on all of the federal and provincial procurement opportunities. So at that time, it was a debate in Canada about, frankly, whether or not we gave up too much. So if you really look at the history of this, and you know what I'm concerned about is I want to keep this in the proper context. I go back 5-6 years ago, 2015, we had of the 500,000 contracts that were awarded to companies that were outside of the U.S., Canada secured about 4% of it, about $700 million worth, which in the overall scheme of things is 2/5 of nothing. So we have never really been huge as it relates to winning U.S. contracts here in Canada. So the other side of it, and I don't mean to go off, but look, we should expect this. Biden, Harris ran on this. I think that the Biden administration is going to make sure that they wrestle back the whole argument for Trump, because he got elected on the whole pointing to the boarded up auto assembly plants in Ohio and said, look, this is a result of poor trade deals. So I think the Biden administration is going to do everything they can to wrestle back the narrative that they're standing up for American workers. So I think we've got a hell of a job in front of us.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Strickland, do you think the labor unions, the American labor unions, will push for a Canadian exemption based on some of the comments all three of you have made, about our sustainable, our labor practices, the level of integration we have? Based on that, do you think your American counterparts that you work with will support us on this?
Well, our brothers, sisters, and the leadership of North American building trades unions are aligned with supporting Canadian workers. And so to that extent, they certainly are supportive of our initiatives. I do think, though, in terms of a longer term strategy, that we need to leverage this green procurement. Yep. Mr. Newman talked about it. I talked about it. Jerry also talked about, the supply chain for batteries, for example. And so I think the Biden administration, just recently this week made more commitments to greening the American economy. And we have the industry to help support that. And when you particularly consider the massive investment in infrastructure that the Biden government is planning to make, I think we have an opportunity to find ways to circumnavigate this Buy American through leveraging green procurement. I think there's a real opportunity there. And I think in those areas, we might be able to get some exemptions and buy North American.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, do I have time?
1 minute.
1 minute. Quickly, Mr. Newman, the Biden administration has indicated its preference, as Mr. Strickland has said, for worker-centric economic and trade policy. Do you agree that messaging against the expansion of Buy America should be focused on labor?
Well, we are. I mean, I think that I know that where our union stands, and I think I listened to what Mr. Strickland say, that I think that workers in the U.S. Understand that Canada is not the problem. And I get Jerry's point that every government wants to look after its citizens. Of course, I mean, Canada would be the same, whatever the case may be, but we're talking about the situation here of your best neighbor that you could ever imagine, and having an integrated trading market that we've had for years and years and years. Now, I said we had to reset the relationship because we had a few cloudy days when it comes to the aluminum and steel and the tariffs, not once but twice. So I'm somewhat more optimistic about the fact is that we have an opportunity, and I think the environmental thing, and Meg at some point can talk about, because she's also the president of Blue Green Canada, and they just put together a big announcement today because, as you know, Biden's put together this big project in regards to the responding to buy clean, and I think that that's an avenue that we should be pushing as hard as we possibly can.
Thank you, Mr. Sarai. Well, now, Monsieur Savard-Tremblay.
Mr. Savard-Tremblay, 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. Very, very interesting to hear these discussions about procurement. I would ask a question that I've asked before of several witnesses in this committee. Do you think that these exemptions could fall under the dispositions of energy? That is to say that to resources like aluminum, it's not a green energy per se, but in Quebec, we produce aluminum that is greener than the Chinese aluminum. So do you think that we don't want to slip through the cracks here? This is a question that we're wondering about. Should we push the notion of green energy? But to get to the point of negotiating with the United States, that would allow us to succeed. I think we're going to have some sort of show of force to be able to push back against what they will say to us. Do you think then that we would have to start with a type of similar description where we say where the United States has a Small Business Act, we should have something like that to deal with any type of crisis? We have to sit at the same table and speak the same language.
Who was the question to? I'm not sure.
As I said, I have asked the question before. This is a question to all of today's witnesses. Anybody who'd like to answer?
I could take a shot at the beginning, and maybe you can repeat the second part of the question. But certainly in terms of the aluminum production that you referred to, steel production, cement production, our electricity generation capacity and how clean that is. And you look at our supply chain and how close we are to the United States of America. And so the transportation greenhouse emissions between Canada and the U.S. compared to bringing materials offshore. So I do think we have an opportunity to leverage, this green procurement for infrastructure and the manufacturing of American goods. And I think that might be the sweet spot. So I would agree with you. And I think the Canadian Embassy and others are working on that. And, there's all kinds of examples, in terms of lithium battery supply. We're the 4th largest lithium battery supply manufacturer in the world and the greenest. So there's all kinds of aspects of Canadian industry that are greener and provide better alternatives to the United States and should be exempt from Buy America policies.
So Sean is right. I think the key piece for us is, where do we find the sweet spot with the U.S.? Where do we find the areas of commonality? And, we're talking about Canada being a leader in low carbon building materials. And Sean's right. Whether we're talking about cement, timber, aluminum, steel. Look, I think it's about Canada's electricity is probably about 82% emissions free. So if we're talking to the U.S. about commonality, about elimination of greenhouse gas, about manufacturing with a green footprint, then I think those are the areas of commonality where we can have the discussions. But then you also raised, the importing of goods that are built by anything but green technology. And I'll talk about China for the lack of a better choice of words. So does Canada now invoke a tariff, on high carbon products coming into Canada? We should talk about that. Obviously, it'll create a political discussion with China. But I will also argue we ought not to be afraid to have those discussions. So I think the focus of any strategy that we have coming out of this is A, finding the areas of commonality, and B, moving forward. Look, Sean raised a whole issue of electric vehicles, and we spent a lot of time talking about that. And I've personally spent a lot of time negotiating investments with the Detroit Three, probably about $6 billion worth in Canada over the last few months. And so we know the heart of an electric vehicle is the battery. Cobalt, magnesium, nickel, aluminum, it's the key pieces. So we should be using that as the footprint of our strategy. But that's another area of commonality with the United States that's spending a lot of time talking about greening the auto industry. So I think we need to start concentrating on those pieces that we have in common and see where we can go from there.
Meg, did you want to take?
Sure. Yeah, on our behalf, I mean, I think that what the others have said is essentially correct in our position as well, that this that our products that are much greener than those that are made in other parts of the world is a real point of leverage and way that we can use, or an argument that we can use to try to get exemptions. And the Biden administration has been pretty clear at tying in its trade policy and so on with its climate goals as well as its labor goals. And so I think there is a real opportunity there. And in fact, today there was an announcement between the two countries, Canada and the U.S., on greening government initiatives, and that looks exactly to some of these things where we look to procurement, to the to federal procurement and government procurement and so on as a way of ensuring that we're using cleaner products that would be in both Canada and the U.S. So I think this is exactly where we should be targeting and using our leverage in this type of thing.
Merci, Monsieur Savard-Tremblay.
Thank you, Mr. Savard-Tremblay.
You have 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I had to negotiate with our critic who's normally on this committee, Daniel Blakey, and of course my Hamilton Steel caucus made Scott Duvall to be before us here today for my number one priority, which is steel. Mr. Newman, you'll know that the locals here with Ron Wells and Gary Howe and others had an opportunity to reach out to them and just talk about this. But before I get to that, I want to share with you a comment that I picked up on some earlier testimony by Ms. Greenwood from the Canadian American Business Council, who suggested that Canada is not the target, except for maybe steel. And I just want to open it up, thinking about the way in which Bain Capital took Hamilton Specialty Bar, the bankruptcy, the way in which the U.S. Steel restructuring affected our workers. And I want to ask through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Newman, to what extent and how are the American Recovery and Reinvestment Acts, the Buy American provisions, both similar and different from the Buy America provisions that may currently limit Canada's access to some of these contracts as it relates to steel?
I'm not sure I quite understand what prevents us? I mean, because right now,
to restate the question, maybe in a clearer way, I'm wondering, when I'm talking to Ron and he's talking about the way in which the hot band coils are coming back and forth between the States and Canada, like if you can just maybe express to the committee, how do we even know what would be Canadian made versus America made at the end of the day when it comes to these products that are being used on American procurement? Are we protected by that? Are we already kind of de facto carved out? Because I understand that U.S. Steel right now is producing a lot. Dofasco is producing a lot. I'm just wondering if you want to comment on how these restrictions are.
Look, I think this boils down to the longstanding relationship. The fact is, as I said earlier in my testimony, that sometimes you'll have a slab that could be produced in Hamilton or Lake Erie. It could cross the border 4 or 5 times before it turns into a final product. So there's this longstanding relationship between Canada and the United States, and that's where I don't see what's Canada being the target. The fact is that why would you punish your best neighbor? You got you're kind of a stone throw from one another. And if you look at the trading relationship we've had over the years, and we've exposed a lot of those things during when the U.S. was targeting as a national security threat that Canada by far is not the problem. So you're correct. That's when those trucks are coming across the border, is that you would know where that ingot was poured at, or the slab was poured at, and that's just been that's the purpose of the integrated market. I mean, I said before is that many of us have crossed those borders and seen them trucks going back and forth. So I don't see that as the threat. I see that the fact is that we've got an opportunity that we should strike at it.
So with that being understood and acknowledging the fluid way in which our steel travels back and forth, I asked the previous witnesses for testimony around whether or not they thought it made sense to have a more formal carve out for steel, to be explicit in this friendship and this longstanding relationship, to perhaps ensure within legislation or within the caveats of our agreement that our steel and our workers that are here, our Canadian steel workers, are duly protected, because we know that there could be opportunities for our Canadian plants to be used as a bit of a flow through for American products. So what would you like to see as a response to potential American protectionism?
Well, first of all, is that someone mentioned, I think maybe Mr. Strickland or maybe Mr. Diaz, in regards to, we talked about China. First of all, is that we've not been able to put a good handle on regards to dump steel. You've got a country such as China that produces in excess of 1 billion tons. They use capacity of roughly 800 million tons. The rest, they look for a home. They're not going to keep it in their scrap yard. They're going to look for it to go someplace else. So we've had North American spot. We've not been able to deal with the massive dumping that's taken place from the cheaters. You mean that many countries that are not living by the rules, they have terrible standards. The carbon footprint that's one of the biggest problems that we've had. You look at Canada, if you look at all the steel mills we used to have in Hamilton and all those other, the number of employees that are working there today, if you look at the amount of steel that Canada produces today, going back to 2014, we're losing. We're continuing to slowly diminish the amount of steel that we get to produce, and that's just wrong. The fact is that we've invested, we've got companies to invest, you've got highly skilled people. It's just, to me, it's just a no-brainer. The fact is you've got the country, the politicians that haven't figured out the fact is that how do you deal with countries that are just dumping and not playing by the rules? You can't compete. And the other thing, sometimes, you know what, as politicians, sometimes you have to take a look in the mirror. Why is it that the Gordie Howe Bridge initially was destined to be built of Chinese steel? We were involved in that, and it was, I think, at the time, Gary Doer was the ambassador. We finally got them to change it to have North American steel. Why is it that we still have steel bridges being built in Montreal and BC? That the steel comes from China? Now, someone's got to explain to me how that makes sense. If you look at the carbon footprint and what they've just announced today in regards to greening, the environment, of course that's important. We all agree with that. But then on the other hand, they'll go ahead and they'll have ships come from China, which has a high carbon footprint. But that's for another topic. I just get wound up on this stuff. Sorry.
No, I appreciate it. I share your passion with it, and thank you for the time, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Thank you. We will go now to Mr. Lewis for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I share your passion as well, sir. Very much. Mr. Chair, through you, I guess to the entire panel. So it kind of goes like this. I'm the ultimate thinker going forward, but at the end of the day, the Windsor Assembly Plant has been shut down for 3 or 4 weeks now, and it'll be shut down for another 2 or 3 weeks. Why? Because we have no chips to put into bumpers. Why? Because no chips are built on Canadian or U.S. soil. Why? Because they're all built overseas. So if we're going to truly find a resolution to this true relationship, it has to start and has to end right here on Canadian, North American soil. Of course, we have to make it more affordable, but we need it because our workers are sitting at home, our businesses are bleeding and hemorrhaging jobs to everywhere else but us. Us being ourselves in Canada and the United States. So I suppose, I guess I'm going to direct this question through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Dias. Would it not be smart to start to produce more of those types of manufacturing, those very intricate pieces for our cars, be it EVs or not? And I do understand, I'm very proud to be the Conservative Caucus chair.
I'm very proud to do that. And I know there's 121, I believe, EVs coming. And I believe downriver as well, Mr. Diaz, as you know, in Michigan there, I think GM's going to start building EV pickup trucks. But if there's no bumpers to get there, there's no chips to put in, what are we going to do? So I guess my question to you, sir, is very simple. Is it not important that we have each and every aspect of the manufacturing done right here in Canada?
Well, there's no question. You've taken a proper position not only on manufacturing, but in a variety of other pieces in the food chain. Think about the pandemic. Talk about a nation that was completely unprepared. We couldn't even keep our own citizens safe. We had no way of providing vaccines. We couldn't even provide masks or gowns because as a nation, successive governments have always believed in the theory of when you can buy it cheaper, it's best. So we've outsourced our safety, and frankly, we've outsourced so much of how we can maintain manufacturing in this country. So you're right. So the assembly plants are down in North America because of the lack of computer chips. But it lacks an industrial strategy that has, frankly, been generations. We're the only nation in the world that's so rich in natural resources and raw materials, and have never had a strategy to put Canadians to work based on that strategy. So today's discussion, and you're right, is how do we do things differently? How do we learn from, frankly, the U.S. implementing a Buy American strategy? Do we talk about a Buy Canadian strategy? If we're going to have $100 billion a year worth of Canadian procurement, why in the heck wouldn't we have a strategy that says we're going to use the $100 billion to put Canadians to work? So these are the types of discussions that we have to have. We can't have governments with a complete free enterprise mindset that says, look, Canadian workers have to drop their wages to be competitive, to like somehow we can be competitive with Mexican workers. So we're going to have a real straightforward, aggressive conversation on globalization. And we're going to have a straightforward conversation on the needs of a nation and what that means.
Thank you, sir. And Mr. Chair, how much time, please, sir?
45 seconds.
45. Thank you very much. I'll go very quickly. So I guess the last portion I'll say is obviously automotive assembly would be tier 1. I do know that tier 2s and tier 3s, they're struggling enormously at the border. They are taking it off the chin, something fierce, because there's no clear and concise direction. And if we cannot get bumpers as an idea, as an example across the border, there'll be no cars to assemble, quite frankly. Mr. Diaz, could you comment on that, the importance to get our manufacturers back and forth safely, of course, across the border?
No, you're right. There's two pieces to this conversation. There's the free flow of parts between the border. So you're right, the automotive industry, and Ken talked about it with the steel industry. There's parts across the border 5-6 times before they get assembled in a vehicle. So that can't change. So that's one part of the conversation. The other part of the conversation, of course, is about procurement. So we're never going to have an auto industry here in Canada where we are going to supply all of the parts. But we need to make sure that the bulky commodities are built close to the assembly plant. So we can't lose that. But you're right. We have to make sure that the technology, the manufacturing capability, and the assembly is within the Canada-US region in order to make sure that our assembly plants are running. And you're right. We can't allow to the offloading of the guts of the vehicle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Thank you, Mr. Lewis. We'll go now to Mr. Housefather for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Mr. Strickland and Mr. Dias, and Mr. DeCaro and Mr. Newman and Ms. Gingrich. Thank you for being here. I really do appreciate it. And Mr. Dias, I'm very interested to talk to you a little bit about purchasing in a second. But before we do that, I have a question about Buy America for Mr. Newman and Mr. Strickland. Basically, I was listening to a lot of what you said, and I completely agree that we're very much aligned with the Biden administration. We have a lot of values in common, environmental, labor standards, etc. And we have allies in Congress on those issues. in terms of finding a way, I think, to work with the Americans to look at what we do well and where we can find common ground to create that type of North American framework. But as you mentioned, in the Trump administration, Trump won in 2016 by convincing a lot of people in labor, a lot of blue collar people, that free trade with Canada and the world was bad. And instead of trying to correct that impression, it seems to me like the Biden administration and a lot of politicians in the US seem to believe that it's better to just go along and reinforce that theory and just show that they're even better than Trump at Buy American. And I looked at the statements of the AFL-CIO, the statements of the Teamsters that saluted Biden when he went ahead with the Buy America policies. So could you just sort of give me an idea of what you are finding when you're talking to your American counterparts in your unions as to what they're seeing on the floor of Congress and whether or not they really believe that there is a way to educate the American lawmakers so that we actually would get section exemption, or should we turn toward a Canadian strategy as Mr. Dias was suggesting? I know that's a long-winded question, but if you could just sort of speak to that, I'd like to know.
Well, in my view, as I said, that we released a statement both from myself and the president of the International, and I know the president of Thomas Conway is very much connected with the Biden administration. And I know we've talked to the person that's now become the person that looks after the infrastructure, and we've been having ongoing discussions. And look, there's some asks that they have. One of the things that I can share with you that the Americans are concerned about is in regards to how does Canada deal with the circumvention? Are we protecting our borders? And the fact is what they're afraid of is you're going to have a whole bunch of Canada's going to become a source of a dumping ground, and then somehow it gets transshipments and it gets over. So those are things that we need to deal with. And I can confide with our president that we've raised this with the Canadian government, and I think the Canadian government's going to pay some attention. But the point that they all understand, the information we're getting back, they all recognize that Canada is not the problem. And if you look at the amount of lumber, steel, and aluminum, if you look at that big, they need those products. And the fact is, when you go to the point that was made at the beginning, this is about the green. You got the president and you got the Canadian government today, that they basically have, if you look at the most recent announcement of raising the bar in regards to environmental, that's where the society is hitting. We have an opportunity to strike. And my confidence is to look at workers in the United States understand that Canada is not the problem. Sure, there's politics. There's going to be protectionism and that sort of stuff. We probably have that as well. So that's how I see it, that the Canadian workers are not the problem.
I think we all agree on that. The question is how the Americans perceive it. Mr. Strickland, did you have anything you want to add on that?
Sure, Mr. Housefather. Thank you very much for the question. I think, it's fair to say that our offices in the U.S. have the ear of some influential members of Congress and influential members of Senate. I think the dynamic here, not to oversimplify it, is that sometimes good politics doesn't make good public policy. And you're all politicians, you get how that works. And unfortunately that's the nature of the beast. And so we're dealing with a dynamic where much of the American public believes that Buy America is a good economic policy. And that's going to help get members reelected, in the midterms and so on. And so, we can have these conversations, and we can have reasonable conversations with elected officials on both sides of the border, but sometimes it's tempered by politics. And so that's the reality of what we have to try and cut through. And I've given you numerous examples of how, and we've shared this with our counterparts in the U.S. for construction, on how Buy American policies is not good for construction. But sometimes that gets trumped by politics.
Totally agree. Mr. Chair, do I have a minute left?
No, you have 10 seconds left.
Oh, Mr. Dias may be offline. I would like to talk to you about the procurement strategy. I'm sorry about that.
No problem.
Thank you.
No problem.
Thanks. Well, we'll set it up. Thanks.
Monsieur Savard.
Mr. Savard Tremblay, 2.5 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. I'll come back to my previous question because I think Mr. Strickland answered the first part, but asked me to repeat the second part. Do we have to adopt a policy, the equivalent of Buy America, or something similar insofar as possible? Because each country has its own economy, but will we have to adopt a similar policy? It can't be a completely identical policy to what is in the United States. But we need something that would allow us to prioritize our own industries. And you have the Small Business Act that has been enacted there. Should we have a policy of procurement, of the awarding of contracts would promote our Canadian and Quebec businesses?
If I can respond to that, Mr. Chairman, I think there's certainly room for that kind of conversation. I do know, for example, on many large federally or large infrastructure projects with federal funding, there's Buy Canadian requirements, particularly on transit projects and so on. So I think anything that can support, and further to Jerry's point, that can support the reindustrialization of Canada is a good thing. And for construction workers, we do all the maintenance in all of these automotive plants and steel plants. And so we have a vested interest in the reindustrialization of Canada as well. So I think there's room for that. But of course, as you know, MP Simon Pierre, is that when we're dealing with the U.S., we're dealing with the largest economy in the world. We talk about China, but the U.S. is still the largest economy in the world. And so we had to be very careful with what kind of practices we put into place, not to jeopardize that relationship. And, for over 100 years, it's been a pattern of very colorful and windy relationship when it comes to trade with our U.S. counterparts. So I would answer your question. I think there's room for that discussion. We can look at things that are in place already, maybe amplify it, but we have to be cautious not to jeopardize the overall relationship.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Savard-Tremblay.
Question. We'll go to Mr. Green for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you. And I just want to say that I shared the observations of Mr. Diaz about our $100 billion COVID recovery opportunity, and certainly share his perspectives. He referenced 2009, and I think that his affiliates would have been on
I'm
the
sorry to
letter.
interrupt. Mr. Green, could you please lower your microphone?
All that goodness. Does that mean I get to start again?
Yes, that's
so
fine.
I just wanted to say that I noted and shared the observations of Mr. Diaz that we do have a $100 billion opportunity here before us in COVID recovery. And I know that when he talked about 2009, that he joined, I would imagine, a group of labor and civil society organizations on a joint statement about public procurement. This is not new. And they talked about the recession at that time, that it was justified for that type of taxpayer-funded stimulus. So my question, when you reference that Canada only makes up 4% of the U.S. contracts, I'd be interested to know if you know what the reverse is in terms of the percentage of American procurement on Canadian projects. And if you would care to comment through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Diaz, on what would be some of the advantages and disadvantages for Canadian firms and workers if we were to attach Buy Canadian conditions to the $100 billion COVID recovery for funding of domestic public infrastructure projects?
A heck of a question. So the 4% that Canada had won in 2015 was of the contracts that were awarded outside of the U.S. So it was $700 million, period, which is 2/5 of nothing. So we've never had this huge amount of money that was ever really sourced for federal contracts. Now, the way the U.S. works, and you know this, is that the majority of the money goes from the federal government to the states. And so the WTO rules don't kick in as it relates to the individual states' procurements. So that's how we end up getting shut out. But the bottom line is that we have to concentrate on what we can control. And we can't control the Biden administration's determination to buy America. I mean, ultimately, he is going to wrestle back, and I said it earlier on, the narrative from the Trump administration. So I see it's going to get worse before it gets better. So we have to deal with that simple reality. So what can we control? We can control $100 billion worth, period. So we need to make sure that we put $100 billion worth of government procurement into keeping Canadians employed. The fact that we spent $1 billion to have trains for VIA built in California by Siemens makes absolutely no sense. So those are the types of mistakes we've made. We've always, inherited this Boy Scout attitude. I mean, if you take a look at the Canadian contact provisions in transit, it's much lower than they are in the United States. Why? Doesn't make any sense to me. So if the U.S. is going to have a 70% content, why in the world can't we have a 70% content here in Canada? We need to play by the same rules as others.
Well, rest assured, sir, I'm no Boy Scout, so we'll be good on that end.
Thank you, Mr. Green. I appreciate that. I want to thank the witnesses in no particular order, except them appearing on my screen, Mr. DeCaro, Mr. Newman, Ms. Gingrich, Mr. Strickland, Mr. Diaz, and I guess that's it. So thank you all very much for taking the time on this Thursday evening for enlightening this committee. I know that, and I extend my deep appreciation for enlightening us on this issue and helping us with our deliberations during this study. So thank you very much, and everybody have a great weekend.
Thank you, and have a safe weekend.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to committee.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good to see you, Sean.